Western medicine is ideal from bringing someone from emergency to stable, whereas functional medicine helps people go from chronic to normal to optimal. It's now possible in genetics to genetically determine if you're more suited towards keto, paleo, Mediterranean, high carb, or some shade of gray in between. There's actually over 10 genetic causes of excess weight. I've identified 17. Once I figured out my genes and I saw like, oh, I'm just optimized for a completely different environment, I literally cried. I was like, okay, now this makes sense. My body's not out to get me. I just have to change my environment as much as possible to match my genetics that are optimized for something else. I find this in particular, people very left-brained. When they see the genetics, it's just there. Like they can't really argue with it. And then suddenly the changes can happen. Like I quit coffee, done. When I saw that I had a big bright red dot, like, okay, we're done. Caffeine and I are done.
All right, welcome everybody to the Ageless Future podcast. This is your host today, Cade Archibald, and I'm joined by a really amazing guest today. Really excited to dive into some interesting topics around health. So it's Dr. Sam Shea. He's a functional medicine expert, speaker, stand-up comic. He helps people get out of survival mode and reclaim their energy, focus, vitality through personalized functional lab testing and his signature NeuroHarmony model. So he's gone through his own chronic fatigue, insomnia, digestive issues since childhood, and he was able to, turn his recovery into a mission. And so he's spent the last 25 years mastering the science of nutrition, mind-body medicine, along with clinical lab testing to decode the root causes of burnout, overwhelm, and chronic health issues. So very honored to have Dr. Sam here on the podcast. How's it going today?
It's going good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, really excited to have you on. And how I got into kind of the health space as well as I went through my own chronic fatigue, brain fog. It seems like everyone that gets into kind of more this functional medicine space has their story, but I'm curious, maybe dive in a little deeper. What got you into functional medicine?
Well, I got into functional medicine the same way I got into stand-up comedy, through tragedy. And the functional medicine was, I was supposed to be the third generation medical doctor in my family. And I took a hard pivot into functional natural medicine, in high school when the tools of Western medicine were not only not helping me, but counterproductive. And again, this is not a riff on Western medicine. I think it's ideal for emergency stabilization, but there's not a lot there for, I view Western medicine as ideal from bringing someone from emergency to stable, whereas functional medicine helps people go from chronic to normal to optimal. And so they're actually two separate tracks, two separate philosophies, two separate toolkits. I was in the chronic box trying to get to normal, and my psychiatrist parents were more interested in drugging me into submission as opposed to actually solving the issues that were plaguing me, like crippling insomnia, severe anxiety from a lot of violence and gaslighting at school, eating disorders, addiction to video games, addiction to sugar, really bad digestive problems, chronic spinal pain from the violence I endured, and several other things. I turns out I also got Lyme disease when I was a child going to a summer camp, and that wasn't figured out until my 30s, but it also explained a lot of the chronic health issues I was struggling with. And then there was also mold poisoning and really terrible diet in the 80s. My parents put me on a low fat, low cholesterol diet because they thought my cholesterol was too high at age 7. And so I was put on like basically gluten and dairy and and just like sugar and glorified sugar. And it was not a good situation. And so I was just getting fundamentally worse. And as I was getting worse, the solution that was repeatedly hammered into me was to stop complaining and get on an antidepressant. And
Wow.
that uh, I decided in high school, like that's not going to work. So I pivoted away from my trajectory to Western medicine into natural medicine under the guidance of a couple mentors and a couple key books that I read when I was a teenager. And then I just went on this very circuitous journey in the realm of natural and functional medicine. And just for people that would like a working definition of functional medicine, that functional medicine, I define it as the best of Western medicine diagnostics with the best of natural medicine's lifestyle, diet, nutrition interventions.
Oh,
So we
that's a great way to explain it. Yeah.
yeah. I view it as kind of the estuary, the mixing of salt and fresh water of naturopathy with Western diagnostics, and that's the best way I've been able to cognize it. And I feel like people really the right now today in the natural and in the health zeitgeist, like people really are looking for that. We want to have the best technology to do the best things, but we would like to do all the natural stuff first, if and
Yeah.
but base it on data, and
I
that's
think,
to me is what functional medicine is. And we are very, very fortunate these days to have incredible diagnostic labs out there. And the very shorthand of my journey is that, like, I went to chiropractic school in Dallas, Texas, where they had the best anatomy labs, and the best kind of overall science education there. Then I got really heavy into functional neurology, which is the master subject, where you can't know neurology unless you know your pathology, physiology, anatomy, microbiology, like rehab, like all the things, nutrition, and all, like you can't get to neurology unless you have everything else underneath it. And I just love neurology, loved it. And then I also then went on to get an acupuncture degree when I lived abroad,
oh,
and then
wow.
studied also with an osteopath, and then got very heavy into functional genetics and functional uh, functional medicine. I studied under Dr. Kalish for 4 years, who is a really well-known instructor in functional medicine, at least within the functional medicine community. And then I really developed a specialty for functional genetics, where, again, it's the same type of concept philosophically, that there's medical genetics, which is, do you have the gene that you're permanently cursed with? And like, we just need to figure out a way to stabilize you from this accursed gene. Or in functional genetics, it's, we have this concept, like the genetics is not necessarily an on off switch, it's more of a dial. And your genes determine how wide that dial range is before it kind of goes off kilter. And we use lifestyle, diet, nutrition to change the way those dials are turned. And that's what we called epigenetics, the influences that we can on our own physiology that are interpreted through our genes to then create a better health expression. So even Western genetics, and I call functional genetics, philosophically have two different goals. It's the same, but it's the same philosophy. There's stable crisis into stable versus chronic to normal to optimal, and now we have genetics testing that does that as well. So that's been the short version of how I got where I am today. And when going on to podcasts or summits or whatever, what I love to talk about the most is actually labs, because there's so many different types of labs out there, and there's different categories of labs. And for anyone listening to this, if you're going to work with a practitioner, I would really, really encourage that your practitioner has two specific frameworks to work, that that they have. One is that they have an outside in lifestyle analysis framework, where they're looking at when I say lifestyle, like I have one called the NeuroHarmony method, where we look at 10 specific categories of lifestyle. For me, it's looking at digestion, it's looking at physical structure, it's looking at exercise routines and recovery, toxic exposure, nutrition, morning and evening routines, mold and other infection sources, sleep hygiene, stressors, unresolved traumas, etc. Like, I have a framework looking from the outside in
Hmm.
at lifestyle, but then they also have the practitioner should have a framework looking from the inside out, which is labs. So I have a framework for labs and I have a framework for lifestyle. And so the framework for labs is, in general, there's 5 categories of labs. There's hormone labs, there's gut labs, there's mitochondria energy labs. Then there's like the weird stuff labs, mold, lime, metals, environmental,
Yeah.
like the bad stuff, like the labs you don't want positives on this at all.
Yep.
And then genetics. So those are the 5 main categories of labs. And then underneath each of those categories, there's subcategories of those labs. So for hormones, you've got adrenal labs, sex hormones, thyroid. Those are the main subdivisions of the hormone labs. For gut labs, you've got the big gut tests, whether it's like a GI map, a GI 360, a GI effects, a CDSA, whatever it is. That's checking for the infections, digestive markers, commensal beneficial bacteria, gut inflammation, gut immune system, intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. Like those, that's like the big general gut tests. And then the other ones are SIBO under the gut tests. And then you've got food intolerances and then food immune responses. So you've got 3 different subtests under gut. Then under the mitochondria energy labs, this is where you got, this plethora of mitochondrial labs, whether it's like ion panel, Omex, Nutraval, OAT test. And then you've got the other peripherals to supporting your mitochondria, like anemia panels, blood sugar, CBC, CMP, like the generalized blood work that goes into that. And mitochondria panels, I would also include like amino acids, fatty. I mean, they include them, but just to make them a bit more granular.
Yeah.
Under those mitochondria panels, you've got to check for how well your mitochondria are working to generate the ATP in your body. Then you've got checking your amino acids, which are structurally build everything, including your mitochondria. You've got fatty acids, you've got vitamins, you've got minerals, you've got check liver function, and a bunch of other things that go into it. So that's like category 3. And then the bad stuff I mentioned already, hidden infections, mold, environmental toxins, heavy metals, like all the super bad stuff. And then genetics is an entire ball of wax of, are you looking at genetics for longevity and minimizing the effects of inflammation, free radical damage? You're looking at the genes of vitamin D utilization. You're looking at genetic food triggers, genetic food behaviors, genetics of optimal exercise and recovery, genetics of optimal diet. Like, are you vulnerable to histamine? Do you know if you're genetically best suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? So that's the more detailed version of just the 2 simple concepts of, if you're going to work with a practitioner, do they have a framework for lifestyle? Do they have a framework for labs? I got the NeuroHarmony model and these 5 categories of labs, and just make sure you work with a practitioner. It's got a model. Mine's like 10 pillars of health, and they can have like the inverted hypotenuse of wellness. They could have the triangle
Yeah.
of goodness. I don't care. Just make sure that they have frameworks for both lifestyle and labs.
Yeah, I think having that framework is super critical. So we have the Ageless Future operating system. So
Mhm.
it's all around, getting the right diagnostics and testing,
Mhm.
understanding that, and then having the right lifestyle and interventions to really like create ultimately an ageless future. So
Totally.
love that. Love that. So yeah, tell me, so I know one of the places where you really shine is in functional genetics. And I think
Mhm.
I was intrigued by our conversation earlier, just kind of seeing what additional layers that we can add in. So, maybe talk a little bit about some of your findings there, because I know we have a lot of high performers, entrepreneurs that listen to the show and would love to
Sure.
see what are some different ways they can enhance their longevity and performance.
Sure. Well, I'll start with more the philosophy of why we're even doing this from the lens of being an entrepreneur. So one of the people that I listen to a lot is Dan Sullivan, who is I
Yeah,
think one of the most intriguing and fascinating and interesting entrepreneurial coaches out there. And for those of you who listen to a lot of them, I said fascinating and interesting intentionally because he says that a lot in a lot of his talks. So that's a little kind of a
gotta
shibboleth
love
there for
Dan.
people who know about Dan Sullivan. Um, the so he talks about the four freedoms, freedom of time, freedom of association, freedom of purpose, and freedom of finances. And that's why we become entrepreneurs, is to have those four freedoms. But he doesn't mention it explicitly. But there's also the health freedom. And it's kind of hard to enjoy those other four freedoms if you don't have your health. And I mean, it's something that is said quite a lot on his podcast, is like, he who has his health has many I'm butchering the quote, but it's something like, he who has health has many priorities. He who has poor health has only but one priority,
Yeah.
or whatever. Whatever Joe said.
Have your health, you have a million wishes. If you don't have your health, you have but one.
Yeah, I can't remember what the exact quote is that Joe says, but it's something like that. Yeah, and so when I appeal to the sense of, as an entrepreneur, talking to other entrepreneurs, it's like entrepreneurs know that they should invest in a good accountant, a good strategist, a good coach, a good this, that. And then, but somehow when it comes to health, it's like, oh, I can listen to a couple biohacking podcasts and suddenly I'm an expert and don't need an outside analyst to track the numbers. Like you would never run a successful business without someone who's an expert in analyzing the numbers. And why in the world is somehow health any different? And we have the capacity to analyze these numbers. That's what we call labs, whether it's genetics or the other ones. So I would say that for entrepreneurs, if their goal is to, one, enjoy the fruits of being an entrepreneur, and to be even a better entrepreneur, so you're not operating from anxiety or depression induced by a terrible physiology or broken biochemistry, then think about investing in one's health as the same thing as you invest in a good P&L, like a good accountant. Like it's just make it a budget, just budget it, because it is part of your business and frankly one of the points of your business. So that's the first overall frame I would offer to entrepreneurs, is that health is a part of your business, that you can track and have an outside expert to monitor and support you in.
Love that. Yeah.
The next piece I'd want to talk about specifically the genetics, and why genetics these days is, now we can spend a whole separate podcast going into the other four categories, gut, hormone, mitochondria, and the weird stuff that no one wants. I mean, I just left a moldy apartment, which was destroying my health, and I'm in like month, whatever, 4 or 5 of being outside that. So I'm intimately aware of how damaging mold and Lyme and so on can be. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to talk about genetics. And there's a couple new developments in genetics that people should be aware of. And one is that it's now possible in genetics to genetically determine if you're more suited towards keto, paleo, Mediterranean, high carb, or some shade of gray in between. Now, one of the biggest influences on one's health is what you eat. And if you're eating outside your carb window, then you're going to run into, either if you're eating too many carbs for your carb tolerance, then if you're more on a paleo or a keto side of the genetic spectrum, but you're eating carbs like a Mediterranean or a high carb genetic panel, then typically what happens is like your energy levels will shoot up and then crash down. And then it creates this whole like hunger cycle and energy cycle and mood cycle. And then on the other side is that if one is genetically more of a high carb, but you're eating more, like you're being keto shamed into eating keto. This is true story. A client of mine is like a amateur tennis player, and like he's really good. And he's big dude, like 6 foot something. And his friends keto shamed him into going keto, and he started like fainting on court and getting dizzy and super disoriented. And I was talking with him. He was telling me about this at a session, and then I had his carb tolerance results, and I hadn't told him yet, but he volunteered this information to me before I had a chance to tell him the results, that he was going keto. And I interrupted him and I said, under no circumstance are you to go keto, because he had a super high carb tolerance. Like he was way suited to be an unusually high carb person. And I said, you genetically are not suited at all to be keto. at all. And he just like paused and said, I knew it. Like, just, I knew it. Like, it was like his experience of just the total disorientation switching to keto because it was trendy went against his genetics, and he certainly felt it. And also, people who are more ketogenically try a more like higher carb Mediterranean diet. They have their own version of disaster of what happens there. So this is a very different type of test. It's not something that's from 23andMe or Ancestry, because a it's not looking at a variation of a gene. It's looking at the number of duplicates of a gene. So if you imagine your your genetics of your intestine for breaking down carbs as a fort, and you've got a number of cannons lining the fort to take down the Visigoths. In this case, the Visigoths represent carbs in this medieval analogy. That the carbs are charging the fort, and the type of cannon you have, what the version of it is not as important as having the number of cannons. So the version of the gene has actually very little difference on the effect of how many enzymes it pumps out to break down carbs. It's the number of cannons. Like, I'd rather have 10 cannons that shoot out 90 units per hour versus one cannon that shoots out 100 to take down all these incoming carbs. So it's a different type of test, and that's available. And then there's other things that people should know for their longevity and effectiveness when it comes to genetics, is that genes aren't all the same priority. There's not every gene is created equal, and there's there's a this happens, I think, either this past December or the December prior. There was a gentleman named Gary Brecka who went on Rogan and basically said all you need to test are these 5 methylation genes, which is absolutely wrong. And when I get upset, I make a PowerPoint, and so I just dove into the research, and and I recorded 3 separate podcasts across 3 separate hosts, and that's all of my. People can put in Dr. Sam Shea methylation, and it'll pop up. And I just went to and just broke down how methylation is downstream. It's downstream, and especially from inflammation. And it could be considered bidirectional at best with liver detox or dealing with free radicals in the mitochondria or vitamin D utilization. Like methylation is a downstream effect, not an upstream effect. And I showed my papers, my citations, and all the rest of it. And the reason why this is important is that when people typically do genetics testing, is that they're given, here's your 100 to 300 genes and your 100 to 300 genetic variations, and here's your 100 to 300 health tips of no prioritization and no organization. And so good luck with all of that, and hope you don't get overwhelmed and just give up because there's too many things to do of all of seemingly equal importance. And people just careen into nihilistic fatalism and just give up because there's too much, I'm going to give up. My genes read in this thing. I'm probably going to die on Tuesday past the Twinkies. It's not helpful. It's actually counterproductive to receive such genetics reports that aren't.
That's what I see in a lot of the genetics reports, especially 23andMe. You can get so many different genetics, and
Totally.
it's really like, okay, what am I going to do with this information? Because there's just way too much.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Absolutely.
not tactical.
Yeah. So what we want is prioritization, and that is also available. Where if you know what genes are in order of priority and what's upstream, then you don't give 100 to 300 health tips. You can give the top 5 to 10 and start there, that affect the highest number of genes and the highest level of priority first, which then has a beneficial trickle down effect on all the downstream genes, including methylation. So people can know that I am doing these top 5 things, or maybe a bit more, like 10, and it's going to help the majority of the things downstream in some direct or indirect way. So I don't have to be overwhelmed and panicky, and just start there. And then over time, because you do the genetics test once, and over time you can do the first 5, then the next 5 things, then the next 5. You can take however long you want to implement, and it's just only going to improve without feeling overwhelmed. So you can make the game of genetics completely winnable these days, as long as you have a way to prioritize them. Um, One other piece that I want to share is on there's when we talk about longevity, and we're talking about this for like a lot of people listening to are entrepreneurs. I want to talk about weight, not as the measure of what you should be aiming at, but weight as a really good proxy for overall health and well-being. And for those of you who are watching, I'll share a slide. For those of you who are not watching, I'll still talk and describe it so you can see it you can visualize it regardless. There's actually over 10 genetic causes of excess weight. I've identified 17. And there's three categories genetically that those 17 nest underneath. So the three big categories are inflammatory water weight, hormonal toxic weight, and caloric fat weight. Now, there can be a lot of reasons for inflammatory water weight. And for example, hyperinflammatory genes, you've got genes that are just dialed up to be more pro-inflammatory, difficulty absorbing vitamin D, people who have variations in their salt genes. A lot of people blame, oh, you've got these salt genes, therefore you're going to have high blood pressure. I don't always see that. In fact, that's not really common. What I see instead is that people have the salt, air quotes, salt genes, is that they have water retention, not high blood pressure. It doesn't mean high blood pressure can't happen, but I'm usually seeing water retention instead. And then if people who have high vulnerability to histamine, they can retain water because the histamine response is just a variation of the inflammatory response. The histamine response is more of an acute inflammatory, like a bee stings you and suddenly, like the bee didn't inject a half quart of water into your arm, but suddenly your arm is swollen up. And that the histamine is the body's evolutionary defense against venom. It's the flood switch. So if a bee injects venom or a snake bites you or a spider bite or a centipede or a scorpion or some plants or whatever they get stung, your body wants to flood the zone to dilute the venom or toxin quickly before that venom or toxin starts to erode or corrode blood vessels, nerves, and in certain freak cases, bone. Usually there's like a couple of snakes, I think, in the world that can do that. But the whole point of histamine is to flood the zone, to dilute toxins, but it's a cat and mouse game. If you've got too strong a histamine response, you're going to choke off the very blood flow or nerve flow you're trying to protect from the venom. If it's too weak, then the venom is going to start damaging things it shouldn't. So you have this dance with histamine that that there's variations amongst the population of their histamine response because, to be really blunt, evolutionary biology does not give one hoot about who you are. It only cares about your lineage, how far your genes can get into the future. So the best game on average for your lineage to survive is to recombine your genes through sexual recombination, and you get, okay, we've got this percentage is going to be a higher histamine, this percentage will be a lower histamine, and just over the generations, they'll just keep recombining and keep having these new combinations. So like your lineage will survive over time against the backdrop of a changing environment. And for people today, like for me, I'm a high pro-inflammatory person genetically, which is like, sounds super unfair. Why would I have, what's the benefit of being highly inflammatory genes? Well, if back 100,000 years ago, or even 15,000 years ago when we were hunter-gatherers, if I have extra inflammatory genes, if I'm not extra genes, like I have extra sets of genes, but my genes are extra inflammatory, the way that the variation is. If I'm going out with a hunting party and we're going to take down a large animal that weighs, 10 times our body weight, and we're going to try to take it down with a tiny stick that's sharp at one end, it's a very high likelihood one of us is going to get bit, gored, mauled, trampled, or otherwise. So if I'm hyper-inflammatory and I get bit, and my other hunting party member is way less inflammatory and they get bit. Well, the whole point of inflammation is to repair damaged tissue and to bring white blood cells in to kill any infections that are introduced. What is a bite wound? Tissue damage plus the injection of pathogens from whatever in the saliva. So inflammation is basically emergency care.
It's a protecting agent. Yeah.
Exactly. And if I will likely survive short term a hunting party raid than my less inflammatory prone hunting party member. Trade off, which is that's what this lineage nature stuff is. It's all trade offs. Trade off is I'm likely to suffer from more chronic diseases from chronic inflammation in the long term, but the less inflammatory prone hunting party member will be will be more. I'll be more inclined to have more chronic inflammatory diseases
Yeah.
over the long term, and the less inflammatory prone person will have less long-term chronic inflammatory diseases. So it's a trade-off between short-term survival, acute survival versus long-term viability. And so once I figured that out, I suddenly stopped being angry at my genes. I'm serious. Like I was so upset by like, why is my body so sick and everyone else around me seems to be okay? And it's just that there's a mismatch between my genes in the current environment versus what they would have been optimized for on the bleeding edge, quite literally, of a hunting party. So um, so one of the benefits of understanding genes from a functional perspective is that we can start to um, uh, 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 remove this combative relationship with our genes and our bodies. And this is kind of a meta point here, but it's real. Like I remember, like I had horrific insomnia. I in fact never had a growth spurt because I had such crippling insomnia from age 6 to 18. I remember waking up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and actually yelling at my body, "Why do you hate me? Why won't you let me sleep?" Like I was actively like talking, like othering it, like it was some foreign entity that was trying to sabotage my existence.
Wow.
And once I figured out my genes and I saw like, oh, I'm just optimized for a completely different environment. I literally cried. I was like, okay, now this makes sense. My body's not out to get me. I just have to change my environment as much as possible to match my genetics that are optimized for something else. So
Yeah.
it's a subtle point, but it could be the most significant point I make this entire chat. If people are hating their body and they're feeling like, why is my body sabotaging me? It may be that your lifestyle is just not congruent with the genetic dice roll you've been given, which is good news because now you can change that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also explains why, there's a lot of people that will do a lot of things that
Mhm.
seemingly are positive for their health. But maybe it's you experience some mold exposure, things like that. If you're sleeping in a place where some of those things are impacting, there's so many different variables that can cause a lot of heartache and confusion and make it seem like there's no answers and I've tried everything and nothing works. But when you can actually dig deeper and actually get the right testing, because I think the other big challenge we have is our healthcare system today is not designed around these chronic issues. Like it's super heroic from a big catastrophic accident or something and getting to the ER and getting you stabilized. But from there, there's not a lot of great stuff if you're chronically inflamed.
Yeah, and it's like the medical system has a very big sandbox, and I just know where I sit in the sandbox, and I just prefer if there wasn't mission creep from the emergency care ward into the non-emergency care situations. Like my
Uh,
skill sets are completely useless in the emergency room, and I am quite comfortable with that, and I have no interest in being in the emergency room. Zero. And it's like I know where functional medicine is optimal, from chronic to normal, from normal to optimal. And for people who are wanting to optimize, like entrepreneurs, whether it's optimizing your business and so that you can live the life you want vis-a-vis Dan Sullivan's Four Freedoms, really using numbers, whether it's genetics, functional testing, these framework, having a framework for lifestyle, a framework for labs, this is critical for any entrepreneur's success, not just for their health, but also for their business. Because a lot of the business suffers if the entrepreneur is not doing
Oh
well
yeah.
at a minimum. Like it's like these are things that everyone understands, but I think have to be said explicitly from time to time. One other piece just on the genetics. There's also some specific genes that people should look for. One is caffeine tolerance. Now,
Yeah.
now a lot of people think their business runs on caffeine. Now, I had the most bulletproof of bulletproof coffees ever, 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 and I was still a jittery mess when I had my super special, multi-ingredient bulletproof coffee. And the reason why, it turns out when I found out genetically, is that I am genetically vulnerable to, quote, caffeine-induced anxiety and depression, end quote. Caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. So there is a meaningful percentage of people that caffeine, that they think they're getting energy from coffee. They're actually just getting mild anxiety or sometimes major anxiety. They're conflating anxiety with energy. And some entrepreneurs may be really feeling super clenched right now. It's like, oh my God, you can't take my coffee away. It's like, okay, first off, there's other alternatives. We can make this work. And it's better that you know that caffeine is causing you anxiety and possibly depression or contributing to it, because then that's affecting your business anyway. So if you don't know that, you can be just walking down this really dark path of caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. But you can't really know that, until you really look at your genetics. And the same thing is also with alcohol. I've had multiple people stop alcohol only when they saw their genetics. And it's just like, dude, it's just not a match. You can argue all you want. It's just not a match for your genetics. We can hold a grieving party. We can light a candle, whatever you want. But alcohol is not for you based on your genetics. So there's a sense of finality with genetics, which really, really helps people. Like, just, I find this in particular, people very left-brained. They're like, when they see the genetics, it's just there. Like, they can't really argue with it. And then suddenly the changes can happen. Like, I quit coffee. Done. When I saw that I had a big bright red dot, so like, okay, we're done. Caffeine and I are done. And my life's been a lot better for it. And I found other ways to support my energy levels. So I think I can finish there. And just summary. When you work with someone, make sure they have a framework for lifestyle and labs. Genetics is so much more advanced these days, and you can determine so much more right now with it. And that the viability of your business and the whole reason you became an entrepreneur to enjoy those four freedoms is predicated on your health and well-being. So use the exact same principles to build a great business to make sure you have a great health support team by the numbers.
Love it. Yeah. So true. Well, Dr. Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show. For anyone that's maybe listening, wants to follow you or connect with you, is there a good place to send them to?
Yeah, just my website, drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. I also have my YouTube channel. I've got my comedy. I've got a full 1 hour special on what it's like to have Asperger's syndrome on my comedy there. I've got some other material, but I've got like 200 other interviews for health related stuff. But basically my website and YouTube are the best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and maybe we'll have to have you back sometime to dive in even deeper. We just like scratched the surface of some of that stuff. So fascinating conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.